Our pistol discussion today is going to involve the Remington New Model Army, also known as the 1858 Remington. 1858 was the patent year for this pistol by Remington. However, the common and correct designation of this pistol is New Model Army. As far as manufacturing goes, this pistol did not reach manufacturing volumes until around 1860 to 1861. There weren't a lot of them made in 1858. This particular pistol is a Uberti reproduction. It is the most faithful reproduction that I own of the Remington New Model Army. The Remington New Model Army did come in different calibers. Mine is the full-size Army caliber of 44. It could also be purchased in 36 caliber, which is known as a Navy load, and I believe 31 caliber. It was available in different barrel lengths, with mine being the full Army length barrel. There was a sheriff's model with a shorter barrel, and several different iterations of this same pistol. It was very versatile and came in a assortment of arrangements, just like the Colt did. One thing you'll notice off the bat, if you've never seen one of these before, is this pistol does represent a technological advancement to some degree, although Remington wasn't the first to do this. The top strap above the cylinder, this gives the pistol a little more rigidity. The frame, it has a more solid characteristic that pistols would follow this example in years to come, including Colt. By 1871, Colt also had a top strap. In the cap and ball days, the pistols weren't under as much load pressure, but as ammunition and cartridges continued to advance and increase in power, and the transition occurred from black powder to smokeless powder, it was necessary to strengthen the frames. And a steel frame with a top strap for a revolver gives it an edge over the Colt design, which was an open top up until the 1870s. You'll notice the Remington New Model Army has an octagonal barrel. The sights were a dovetailed front sight, a little tall to bring the shots down a bit. Cap and ball pistols do shoot high. I don't know if that was a manufacturing process in the 1800s, but it is now, and I do appreciate this front sight. The pistol has a good point of aim and shoots pretty accurate groups up to about 25 to 30 yards. It doesn't shoot excessively high. The rear sight is a groove cut on the top strap. Let's see if I can get that to focus. You may be familiar with the Colt design. The Colt, being an open top, actually has the rear sight cut into the hammer. However, you'll see the Remington sight picture is a V. There we go, somewhat. It's difficult to focus on that, but possibly a slight improvement. That's just a preference, maybe over the Colt. Some people really like the Colt design. I find they're both equal as far as visibility is concerned, and they're both effective. The New Model Army was mostly steel frame. In fact, they were all steel frame. I'll show you some examples of other Remingtons that I have in my collection. These two Remington replicas, I have one by Connecticut Valley Arms here, and I have one by Pieta. You'll notice that they are brass frame. They essentially are the New Model Army design, as you'll see on my Uberti. This is not historically accurate or correct. The New Model Army did have a brass trigger guard, but the vast majority, if not all of them by Remington, were steel. There were other manufacturers who made brass-framed revolvers with a top strap, but it wasn't Remington. So these pistols are not historically accurate. at all. They are good for beginners if you want to get involved in cap and ball shooting, because they're cheaper than steel. However, they do still have this advantage of a top strap for rigidity, and they're pretty to look at. I just wanted to make it clear that they're not historically accurate representations. So one improvement that I believe Remington made, at least a departure from the traditional method of taking a revolver down as opposed to the Colt system, is your Remington system is easier to remove your cylinder, and which is necessary for cleaning or loading or clearing jams, what have you. You may be familiar with Colt's system. With the Colts had at this time had the open top still, open top to the cylinder, no top strap. And the barrel assembly was held in place to the frame by a wedge that is tapped in. When you want to take the pistol apart, the wedge is tapped or pushed out, removed, and then the barrel assembly comes off. So the cylinder can be removed. It's easy to clean. I do like that system because it enables me to get the nooks and crannies cleaner to some degree. Well, Remington has a different system. So in addition to the rigidity provided by the top strap over the cylinder, removing the cylinder is easier. What you do is place the pistol on half cock. You drop the loading lever, pull this pin out. It doesn't fully come out. It's held in place by a screw. And then you roll the pistol over to the right. Boom. Very, very easy to remove. There's the cylinder. I have a Taylor's & Company cartridge conversion for this pistol that I've made a prior video demonstrating, that converts this 44 caliber to 45 caliber long Colt cartridge rounds. And that's great. It is so easy to reload this way. It's no problem. Colts aren't necessarily a problem either. However, if you have a Colt in the field, I've had this happen to me before at a reenactment. I was clearing a cap jam once with a Colt design, and I dropped the wedge, and I couldn't find it. That's not a problem with the Remington design because everything stays in place. This pin doesn't fall out unless you remove the screw. There's no pieces to get lost. On a Colt, if you lose that wedge, the pistol is useless. If if you were to fire it that way, it would just blow the barrel assembly off, etc. So the Remington has that advantage in design. What I would say is maybe a slight drawback to this system that I just showed you, that is a very thin cylinder pin in there. Let's look at that again. Okay, let's look at this. You see that this is a relatively small diameter cylinder of metal. It doesn't have any grooves cut in it. This is a little more susceptible to powder fouling. Powder, when you fire these cap and ball pistols, gases, fouling will escape from around the cylinder gap between the cylinder and the barrel assembly. It's a very small gap, but you would be amazed how much comes out. And that fouling, it will collect under here, under the top strap, and it'll work its way down around this pin. And if you don't keep that cylinder lubed with your beeswax, Crisco, whatever kind of lube mixture that you use to keep your powder fouling soft, this will bind very quickly. I've had that happen in real time before too, where the binding began to occur after just, I think just after 6 shots, I started noticing a difference. It became harder and harder to pull the hammer back. The Colt has a large arbor that the cylinder rotates around. You see this small opening here on the cylinder. The Colt's is much larger. It has this big arbor that actually has grooves cut in it, and it handles the fouling a whole lot better than this does. That's just a little bit about the pros and cons to these systems. What you sacrifice in protection from fouling, you gain from simplicity. Simplicity in your takedown, simplicity for cleaning, less parts to lose, etc. Another thing about the Remington design that I like is that on the cylinders, there are notches. In between each chamber, you'll find a notch. You see this here at the end of my thumb. You can load your 6 rounds in this Remington, and you can lay your hammer down between cylinders on one of these notches. And that is a pretty safe method of carrying with all 6 cylinders loaded. You don't have to do those cowboy loads per se, unless you just want to. In my personal opinion, the safest way to carry one of these is with the hammer down on an empty cylinder. However, this is very safe. With the hammer down on this notch, the cylinder can't rotate. However, it takes a little less pressure on the hammer to allow it to rotate. That notch still isn't as deeply cut as your cones cut out here. So that's why I would argue that the cowboy load is still the safest method. And here you'll see the Remington New Model Army by Uberti here on the right. This is an 1861 Colt Navy in .36 caliber. These two guns were competitors. Colt, by and large, vastly outsold the Remington New Model Army, at least at first. The government contracts at the time, going into the Civil War, supplied mostly Colt revolvers. So they were extremely popular. As I said, this is an 1861. The 1854 Navy was also still in production at this time, which varied a little bit, but was essentially almost identical to this, with a few discrepancies. However, the manufacturing facility for Colt had a large-scale fire in 1864. And so with supplies drying up of the Colt, government contracts went to Remington, and these started to pop up more and more on those late Civil War battlefields. So both sides began to see these, and the 44 caliber was a good load, a good stout load. Colt also had an Army model, the 1860 Army, that shot 44 caliber. And you saw Remingtons used up until the time of the Old West. This New Model Army, many of them were converted to shoot cartridges by cutting out a loading lever and adding an ejector, a spring loaded ejector to them. And they continued to be popular. They were good pistols. So let me know what your preference was during this time. Do you prefer the Colt or do you prefer the Remington, and why? I think there's good arguments and there are pros and cons to both. So be sure to like my video and subscribe. I'll see you on the next one.